For 2 years, Joseph waited. He had done nothing to deserve the prison where he lived. He had been betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and forgotten by a man he had helped. From the outside, Joseph's life looked as though it had gone terribly wrong. But while Joseph waited in a prison cell, something was happening far beyond those walls. God was preparing the moment that would change everything. One night, Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, had a disturbing dream. He stood beside the Nile River when 7 healthy, well-fed cows came up from the water and began grazing among the reeds. Then 7 other cows came up behind them. These cows were thin and sickly, and suddenly the 7 thin cows devoured the 7 healthy cows. Pharaoh woke up. Then he fell asleep again and dreamed a second time. This time, he saw 7 full, healthy heads of grain growing on one stalk. After them came 7 thin heads of grain, scorched by the east wind. The thin heads swallowed the 7 healthy ones. When Pharaoh awoke the next morning, he was deeply troubled. These dreams felt different. They felt important. Pharaoh called for Egypt's magicians and wise men and told them what he had seen. But no one could explain the dreams. The most powerful man in Egypt had every resource at his command, yet no one around him could give him the answer he needed. And that was when the chief cupbearer remembered Joseph. 2 years earlier, while imprisoned with Joseph, the cupbearer had dreamed a dream of his own. Joseph had correctly interpreted it. Joseph had asked only one thing in return: "Remember me." But when the cupbearer was restored to his position beside Pharaoh, he forgot Joseph. Until now, the cupbearer told Pharaoh about the young Hebrew prisoner who had accurately interpreted his dream. Pharaoh immediately sent for Joseph. Joseph was brought quickly out of the dungeon. He shaved, changed his clothes, and stood before the ruler of Egypt. Think about that moment. Joseph had awakened that morning as a prisoner. Now he was standing before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I have dreamed a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Joseph could have taken the credit. After everything he had endured, this was his opportunity to prove himself. But Joseph answered, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace." Before Joseph interpreted a single detail, he made it clear where the answer would come from. Pharaoh told Joseph about the cows. 7 healthy cows, 7 thin cows that devoured them. Then he described the grain: 7 full heads, 7 thin, scorched heads that swallowed the healthy ones. Joseph listened. Then he told Pharaoh that the 2 dreams carried the same message. God was showing Pharaoh what was about to happen. Egypt was going to experience 7 years of extraordinary abundance. The land would produce more than enough. Harvest after harvest would fill the country with food. But those 7 years would be followed by 7 years of severe famine. The famine would be so devastating that the years of abundance would almost be forgotten. Joseph explained that the dream had been given twice because the matter was established by God and would happen soon. But Joseph did more than interpret the warning. He offered Pharaoh a plan: choose a wise and discerning man to oversee the land. During the 7 good years, collect a portion of the harvest. Store grain throughout Egypt. Build reserves while food is plentiful, so the nation will be ready when famine comes. Joseph had spent years unable to control what happened to him, yet somewhere through those years, God had prepared him to see what needed to be done. Pharaoh looked at Joseph and then at his officials. He asked, "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Because God has shown you all of this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you." And in a moment that Joseph could never have arranged for himself, Pharaoh placed him over the land of Egypt. Joseph was given Pharaoh's signet ring. He was dressed in fine linen. A gold chain was placed around his neck. He rode in Pharaoh's second chariot, while people called out before him. The prisoner had become the second most powerful man in Egypt. But Joseph's rise was not simply a reward for surviving hardship. He had been placed there for a purpose. Joseph traveled throughout Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. The land produced enormously. Joseph gathered grain and stored it in cities across the country. There was so much that eventually they stopped keeping count. The years of plenty were exactly as God had revealed. And then the 7 years ended. The famine began. It spread beyond Egypt into the surrounding lands. People became desperate for food, but Egypt had grain. When the people cried to Pharaoh, he told them, "Go to Joseph. What he says to you, do." Joseph opened the storehouses because of what had been prepared during the years of abundance. People had food when the famine arrived, and Joseph could finally see something that had been impossible to see from inside the prison. The waiting had not been empty. Being forgotten had not meant that God had forgotten him. Joseph could not see the palace while he sat in the dungeon. He could not see the famine that was coming. He could not see the lives that would one day depend on the wisdom God was developing in him. He only knew the place where he was standing at the time. There are seasons like that. You do what is right, but nothing seems to change. You pray, but the door stays closed. You remain faithful, and it seems as though no one notices. It can be easy to look at a waiting season and assume nothing is happening. Joseph's story reminds us that we rarely know what God may be preparing beyond what we can see. Joseph did not know when the cupbearer would remember him. He did not know Pharaoh would dream. He did not know that one conversation would take him from a prison cell to the palace. His responsibility was simply to remain faithful where he was. And when the moment came, Joseph was ready. Maybe you are waiting for something today, an answer, an opportunity, a change you have prayed for. Joseph's story does not promise that every difficult season will end the way we expect, but it does remind us of something worth holding on to. Being unseen by people does not mean you are unseen by God, and a season that feels like a delay may still be part of a story you cannot see yet. Joseph spent years wondering when his circumstances would change. Then, in a single day, the prison doors opened. The forgotten prisoner stood before Pharaoh, and the God who had been with Joseph in the pit, in slavery, and in prison was still with him in the palace. Joseph had been forgotten by people, but he had never been forgotten by God.